Dorian stood patiently in the long check-in line at the airport, his gaze fixated on the beautiful profile of his charming wife, Salome. Her profile, a rare instance where it surpassed the allure of a frontal view, captivated him completely. His love for her transcended mere affection. It was closer to adoration. After a long search, he had found her, and to him, every second of waiting was worth it. Dorian couldn't suppress a smile as he admired her boyish hairstyle, her cute button nose, and her chiseled lips. "What's so funny, Dor?" Salome inquired with a soft smile, not turning her head. "It's okay, Sal, you're just amazing," he responded proudly, his eyes lingering on her long, muscular legs, which were beautifully accentuated by her yoga pants. Their relationship, like any other, had its ups and downs. Dorian was not an easy person. A man of strong principles, his high moral standards were challenging for many. Yet, Sal was the exception. She was complex in her own right. An uncompromising vegan, a minimalist, an environmental fanatic, and a shelter volunteer. It would be fair to say that if they had not met each other, their unique quirks might have led them down very different paths. Dorian and Salome, a couple destined to be together, might have remained single for a long time had fate not intervened. They were introduced 2 years ago by their mutual friend, Betty, who had worked with Sal in the legal department of a large advertising agency for a decade. Interestingly, Betty had once dated Dorian, but their relationship, hindered by opposing worldviews and Dorian's unwillingness to compromise, didn't last, though they remained good friends. This made it easier for Betty to introduce Dorian to Sal, her best friend. Despite not being a perfect match, Dorian was a vegetarian, not a vegan. He leaned right while she was left-leaning. He was a dog lover, and she adored cats. Even their pets, his Belgian shepherd and her ginger cat, didn't get along. Their love blossomed rapidly. 10 months after their first date, they married and were now nearing their first wedding anniversary. They were ready to start a family, with Sal stopping birth control a month ago. Dorian, who worked as a department manager for a large security company, a position offered by a former Army commander, had a past shrouded in secrecy due to his military service. Though he had left the service at 27, he was still called up for active reserve duty a few times a year. Sal's upcoming work trip was a much-awaited event, a 4-day all-inclusive resort vacation with employees and spouses, complete with parties, shows, and tours. But just as Dorian was smiling adoringly at Sal, his phone rang. It was a call to duty, forcing him to leave abruptly despite Sal's protests. After a bittersweet farewell, Sal found comfort in Betty's presence, who promised her the best time at the resort. The flight and drive to the resort were short, and check-in went smoothly. Sal was near her friends Betty and Lisa, and the view of the deep blue bay from her balcony was breathtaking. The resort, with its rooms scattered on the hillside leading down to the beach, offered easy access to restaurants, bars, clubs, and sports facilities. After a quick shower and change, Sal and her friends headed for lunch and then to the bar, their spirits high. Returning to Betty and Lisa's room, they encountered Oscar and Ben, adding another twist to their adventure. The young copywriters who lived in the next room entered uninvited, their faces adorned with mischievous smiles. Oscar, one of the copywriters, pulled out a huge joint and casually asked if they wanted to join in the celebration. The girls, including Salome and Betty, giggled and nodded in delight. "Where did you get this from?" Betty inquired, her voice tinged with surprise. Oscar, with a smug grin, replied that the employee who delivered their luggage had offered them more than just service. "This sets the mood for our entire time here," Oscar declared. Meanwhile, Ben busied himself with setting up a mobile speaker and connecting it to his phone's Bluetooth. As Oscar lit the joint and took a deep inhale, the room filled with the sound of melodious techno music. He then passed the joint to Salome. As she exhaled, a wave of pleasant dizziness washed over her, sparking a forbidden thought. She knew that if Dorian, her partner, were here, she wouldn't be in this room, indulging in such liberties. Dorian, a man who drew strict lines at alcohol, abhorred the feeling of losing control. Salome passed the joint to Betty, giving a nod of approval at its quality. Soon, the room buzzed with laughter and chatter. Though Salome found herself withdrawing into her own world, her quietness amplified by the mix of smoke and alcohol. She sank into a chair, her eyes half closed, gently swaying to the rhythm of the music, enjoying the soothing sensations rippling through her body. In a spontaneous gesture, Ben returned from his room with bottles of vodka, lemon juice, and disposable cups, items he'd picked up at duty-free. Betty, ever considerate, ensured Salome received her drink in a glass, respecting her aversion to plastic. After a toast, they began to dance slowly, swaying to the soothing music that filled the room. The holiday spirit was in full swing. As the evening progressed, the group of 5, including Sal and Oscar, gathered around a communal table for dinner. Salome and Oscar seemed lost in their own world, exchanging flirtatious glances and smiles that didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the group. The evening's events hinted at the beginnings of a holiday that was anything but ordinary. As the evening progressed at the bar, Betty noticed Sal and Oscar's growing disinterest in the rest of the group. This observation led to a confrontation when Betty entered Sal's room while she was preparing for the beach party. Without mincing words, Betty directly asked Sal about the nature of her interactions with Oscar. Sal, slightly embarrassed, confessed that it was refreshing to receive attention from men, something she seldom experienced when Dorian was around. She explained that Dorian's intimidating presence often deterred others from approaching her. "I'm kind of glad Dorian isn't here," Sal admitted. She described Dorian as perpetually tense, even when trying to appear relaxed, which she found stressful. She relished the freedom she felt in his absence, a chance to unwind and have fun without Dorian's overbearing seriousness. She recounted how, in restaurants, Dorian would constantly scan their surroundings, always on alert, which she found exhausting and monotonous. Sal appreciated Oscar's undivided attention, contrasting it with Dorian's constant vigilance, which she likened to playing a never-ending game of spies. Betty, however, reminded her sternly that Dorian's behavior wasn't just a game, but a necessity due to the potential dangers he might face. Acknowledging this, Sal still emphasized her need to relax and enjoy her brief respite from Dorian's intense lifestyle. Later that evening, Sal revisited Betty's room, where she found Oscar and Ben engaged in a laid-back atmosphere, smoking and drinking. Her appearance in a striking black dress left them awestruck. Meanwhile, Betty and Lisa were busy in the bathroom. Oscar, seizing the moment, offered Sal a drink and a joint, further deepening the carefree mood of the evening. When Betty and Lisa finally appeared, Oscar and Ben exchanged knowing glances, feeling like the happiest people on the island. That night, under the full moon, the beach festival was naturally illuminated, creating a magical atmosphere. By 10:30 p.m., the effects of the open bar were evident when many partygoers struggled to stand up and were extremely drunk. Betty's group was in a similar state, not only drunk but also feeling overheated from that night's festivities. Oscar, who does not leave Sal's side, seems to make Betty uncomfortable with his affectionate gestures towards Sal. Meanwhile, Ben made several unsuccessful attempts to connect with Betty and Lisa, who repeatedly rejected him, adhering to their rule of not dating their coworkers. Their rejection was nothing personal. They maintain this stance with every man who tries his luck, no matter how drunk he is. As midnight approached, the DJ's selection of melodic techno music added a sensual rhythm to the scene, heating things up on the sandy dance floor. Oscar and Sal gradually drifted away from their group toward the edge of the crowd, seeking some anonymity. When they felt sufficiently separated, Sal wrapped his arms around Oscar's neck, and in return, he hugged her waist, placing his hands on her lower back. Amidst the drinking, smoking, and sensual dancing, another factor added to the night for Sal. Her body's estrogen levels reached a monthly high, making her feel the need for physical release. Necessary. She becomes increasingly aroused, eventually losing interest in Dorian, Betty, Lisa, or anyone else. Her focus narrowed towards releasing the internal tension that had built up within her all day. As Oscar pressed close to her, Sal felt an intense urge, fearing she might overstep her boundaries right there on the beach. She turned around and pressed her back against him, letting him hold her tighter. At some point, unable to resist anymore, she took his hand and led him toward the beach, away from the party and, more importantly, away from Betty's watching eyes. She gave Oscar a passionate, electric kiss, reassuring herself that they wouldn't go to the end but would just please each other this time. Whispering for Oscar to follow, Sal quickly walked toward the path leading up the stairs, running up without looking back, convincing herself that if she didn't see passers-by, they wouldn't see her either. When she and Oscar arrived at the room, breathless with excitement, she tried to give him the key card used to open the door, her hands shaking so much she couldn't do it herself. Oscar had managed well, and both of them knew what was waiting for them when the door closed behind them. They began to blend together as one. They gave each other kisses, been in love for a while. Admiration. She saw it in his eyes, pleased with her release from her shell. She dropped it. All pretend. They came close to each other, their bodies slowly becoming one, slowly going deeper to understand each other better. Now there was no longer any distance or caution between them. It feels like at this moment no one can stop the two fires that are slowly burning fiercely. They do it, then do it again, and continue to do it again, and many times in one night with countless different positions and different emotions. And she stopped counting how many times, their eyes closed to feel each other's warmth. Perhaps this is no longer a momentary moment for the two of them, but it is like a physical liberation, bringing joy to each other amid the bad emotions that are gradually encroaching, making them tired. Combined with the smoking and dancing made this walk sublime and sweet. Sal simply collapsed, exhausted, on her belly, on the mattress, and started to fall asleep. Next morning, Sal woke up with a terrible hangover, and Oscar was nowhere to be seen. At first everything was in a fog. She doesn't understand where she is. First coherence. That thought came to her head like a poisonous arrow through her temples, is, my marriage is over. This is terrible. Thoughts soon turned into panic, feelings of guilt and shame, more than she could handle. What did I do? She wanted to scream, but cannot. She pulled her hair, but she has no power. She ran to the bathroom to vomit, but nothing appeared. She is so thirsty that she drank the rusty water directly from the sink faucet. Then she went back to her bed and collapsed. Wrap yourself in bed sheets. She cried bitterly after a while. A gloomy thought appeared in her mind, and she ran to the balcony. Ha, slope, she thought. That's a damned slope. I can't even kill myself. Despair and brokenness. She went back to bed and lay there for several hours, not moving. In all possible situations, she plays out in her head. The last door will find out what happened. Only option is to confess everything. But maybe he won't forgive her even when he forgives. Their relationship will never be the same. Dorian won't trust her anymore. And that's right. She doesn't trust herself. She is sincere. Ask yourself, can she forgive Dor? Similar betrayal case. And the answer is no. At breakfast, Oscar and Ben know that they are no longer welcome at the girls' table. They were very disappointed, but didn't create any scene. That same day, Betty and Lisa rented a car and drive to the other side of the island to see a landmark named Pink Beach. They discussed, should I invite Sal? But decided not to. She doesn't come to breakfast and lunch. So they suppose she needs time alone. On the way there, they picked up 2 children, Italian companions. Pink Beach is located in a secluded area, about half an hour walk from the nearest place. Parking lot. The effort is worth it. Pink sand is more than just fun to look at, but also extremely soft. On the way back, they stopped at a vegetarian restaurant and ordered takeout for Sal. They also managed to get her some pills for the morning. Sal, at first, will not open the door to them, but after Lisa almost broke the door, Sal relented and let them in. She looks terrible. Messy hair, red swollen face that says a lot of tears, and an old one. The smell showed that she had not bathed since the previous day. Betty and Lisa pull their friend into a long group hug. It took a lot of convincing, but in the end Sal agreed to take a bath and then eat something. However, she is blunt, refused to come down for dinner room with them. She doesn't want to see understanding look or hear whispers. Completely awake and couldn't sleep, Sal spent a long time and painful nights. Her mind awoke, asked difficult questions, and gave no answer. What will she say to the door? How much will she tell them? How could she convince him that it is one timing mistake and that she is willing to do anything to make up for mistakes? Finally, after all the emotional pain, she had come to a painful place, decided she was one realistic girl. If her fate is to lose her husband, she has no other choice but to continue, despite all the pain she felt. The next day at lunch, Betty and Lisa was surprised to see Sal burst into the dining room in a floral sundress, magnificent view, and smiled. However, she avoided looking at the other customers. The dinner went well, and she even joined them for the final party on the beach that evening. But this time, she avoided drinking and smoking. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Sal heard a light knock on her door. She didn't sleep. When she opened the door, she was surprised to find Oscar standing alone with a pleading look. She shook her head and closed the door. The next day, Betty, Sal, and Lisa stood quietly in line to check in at the terminal for their flight home. Oscar and Ben, standing behind them, couldn't stop chatting and seemed very happy. At some point, Betty couldn't take it anymore, so she turned around, gave Oscar a sharp look, and said at breakfast, Oscar and Ben learned that they were no longer welcome at the girls' table. They were very disappointed, but did not make a scene. That same day, Betty and Lisa rented a car and drove to the other side of the island to see a landmark called Pink Beach. They discussed whether to invite Sal, but decided not to. She didn't show up for breakfast and lunch, so they assumed she needed time alone. On the way there, they picked up two young Italian fellow travelers. Pink Beach was in a secluded area, about a half-hour's walk from the nearest parking lot. The effort was worth it. The pink sand was not only pleasant to look at, but also incredibly soft. On the way back, they stopped at a vegan restaurant and ordered takeout for Sal. They also managed to get her a couple of pills for the morning. At first, Sal wouldn't open the door for them, but after Lisa nearly broke down the door, Sal relented and let them in. She looked terrible, disheveled hair, a swollen red face that spoke of many tears, and a stale smell that suggested that she had not taken a shower since the day before. Betty and Lisa pulled their friend into a long group hug. It took a lot of convincing, but Sal finally agreed to take a shower and then eat something. However, she flatly refused to go down to the dining room with them. She didn't want to see knowing glances or hear whispers. Completely sober and unable to sleep, Sal spent a long and painful night. Her mind raced, asking difficult questions and giving no answers. How would she tell Dor? How much will she tell him? How can she convince him that it was a one-time mistake and that she is willing to do anything to make up for the mistake? Finally, after all the mental anguish, she came to a painful decision. She was a practical girl If she was destined to lose her husband, she had no choice but to move on despite all the grief she felt. The next day, at lunch, Betty and Lisa were surprised to see Sal burst into the dining room in a flowery sundress, looking gorgeous and smiling. However, she avoided looking at the other customers. The dinner went well, and she even joined them for the final party on the beach that evening. But this time, she avoided drinking and smoking. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Sal heard a light knock on her door. She didn't sleep when she opened the door. She was surprised to find Oscar standing alone with a pleading look. Sal, filled with regret and confusion, shook her head and closed the door, trying to grapple with the consequences of her actions. The next day, at the airport, Betty, Sal, and Lisa stood in line for their flight home, with Oscar and Ben behind them, chatting happily and seemingly unaware of the storm brewing around them. Unable to tolerate their obliviousness any longer, Betty confronted Oscar with a stern warning about Dorian's potential retribution. She suggested that both Oscar and Ben might be in danger, hinting at Dorian's military background and his capability for violence. Saul, meanwhile, had asked Dorian not to pick her up from the airport, suspecting he would immediately sense something was wrong. She dreaded the possibility of their reunion ending in a confrontation. Upon arriving home, Dorian's reaction confirmed her fears. He greeted her with a hug and a kiss, but Sal could only offer her cheek in response, an act that signaled to Dorian that something was amiss. During a tense and silent dinner, Sal finally broke down and confessed everything to Dorian. She spoke of the incident as an isolated event, influenced by alcohol, smoking, and her menstrual cycle, pleading for his forgiveness and a second chance. Dorian, however, reacted with a mix of anger and sadness, hastily packing his bag to leave. Sal's pleas for him to stay were met with his refusal and a clear indication that he needed space. In a moment of desperation, Sal reached out to him, but her touch was met with a mix of reluctance and pain. Dorian's eventual departure was not the end, however. He decided to seek another perspective on the situation and turned to Betty for more insight. In her apartment, Betty corroborated Sal's story and added her own observations, including Sal's refusal of Oscar's advances on the last night. She painted a picture of Sal's remorse and Dorian's deep affection for her, urging him to consider giving their relationship another chance. This conversation left Dorian in a state of contemplation, torn between his love for Sal and the betrayal he felt. The future of their relationship hung in the balance, with both of them needing time to process their emotions and the repercussions of their actions. She even feared for Sal's safety. She also begged him not to pursue Oscar because he wasn't worth the effort and said she doubted he would even show up for work on Monday. Dorian sat gloomy for a long hour, silently staring at the floor. Finally, he stood up, went to the guest room, and locked the door behind him. Betty didn't think now was the right time to ask him to forgive or move on. He needed time to digest what he heard. At noon the next day, Dorian had not yet left the room and did not answer her knock. Betty placed the tray of food by the door and told him she was going to check on Sal. Sal was in worse shape than she had been 2 days ago. It took Betty a long time to convince her to eat and drink something. Luckily, she was too weak and apathetic to resist as Betty dragged her into the bathroom. Closing the bathroom door behind her, Betty collapsed on the floor and burst into tears. The two people she loved the most were in a terrible situation, and there was really nothing she could do to help them. Dorian had not yet left the guest room. When Betty returned from work the next day, she decided to prepare a dinner that included all of his favorite vegetarian dishes. In addition to a special baked salmon, she smiled to herself with pleasure as she heard his bedroom door open, and then the bathroom door closed. He looked almost normal. As he sat down at the dinner table, he even smiled and talked more than usual. After dinner, they sat in the living room with a bottle of wine. "What are you going to do?" asked Betty. "I'll get a divorce. Isn't this too hasty? At the first opportunity that she had, she cheated on me. If you hadn't gotten those pills for her, she might now be pregnant with someone else's child. She made a terrible mistake, but she's only human. She won't repeat this mistake again. Damn it, he will definitely repeat it. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Do you really believe this cliché?" "Yes, definitely. She will never drink or smoke without you. I doubt she'll go anywhere without you other than work. It doesn't have to happen again. Under the same circumstances, it just has to be the right situation." Betty tilted her head and looked at him questioningly, but he simply looked at her meaningfully and smiled. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. "Not a third, but just a second. Saul deserves another chance. I'll throw her to the wolves myself. If she slips up again, I've known her for 10 years. She is a good person, and she loves you very much. Even good people deceive and do bad things. They don't deserve special treatment. I really think you're wrong about this. Not just about all of us humans, but especially about Sal. We can all make critical mistakes when circumstances go right or wrong. I guess why didn't you and Lisa make a mistake? You're not even married. Well, not being married. We couldn't make that particular mistake. We certainly had fun though, but not with your colleagues, and I'm willing to bet you use protection. Always bet on Betty. You won't miss," she said mischievously. "I'll tell you what," she said, after a pause. "Give her one more chance, at least for a week. You decide you can't continue. I'll understand, but at least try for both of you, as well as for me. I love you both so much. I will agree to do everything to keep you two together. What anything? I have an idea, but I don't think you'll like it. Do you want to bet?" Saul stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Betty had already told her that Dorian had decided to give her another chance and would return home that same evening. Hearing the front door open, she turned around cautiously. At first, Dorian stood at the entrance and looked tense, but as soon as he smiled at her, she dropped everything, ran up to him, jumped on him, wrapped her legs around his waist, and covered his entire face with kisses. He tried to avoid it, the way one avoids being licked by a loving puppy. He simply patted her on the back affectionately. The dinner was pleasant, and Sal did not feel any displeasure from it for the first time in a week. She felt happy and hopeful. That night in bed, he politely rejected her advances. "It's too early for me," he explained, and she understood. She didn't fool herself into thinking that, in a moment, everything would return to normal. She had all the patience in the world, because she had hope. In the days that followed, they went out to dinner and shopping, cuddled on the couch in front of the TV every night, and even kissed lightly. Everything looked promising. However, on Friday night, Dorian dropped the bomb. They were sitting, huddled together on the sofa in front of the TV, when Dorian suddenly spoke. "I have bad news." Sal flinched, then looked at him tiredly. "When Betty convinced me to give you another chance," he said in a cold voice. "Don't take your eyes off the TV screen, on the condition that you feel my pain." Salome tilted her head to the side in confusion. "The only way we're going to move forward is if I get even. I'm sorry for something," Saul stammered. "I'm going to spend the weekend with Betty. If you can accept this, then when I come back, maybe we can actually start again. She would never dare to hurt me like that. She wouldn't dare. That's my only condition." And she agreed. "I will go tomorrow night and return Sunday night, and then we can continue." "Please don't do that. This is madness. She is my best friend. Please don't do this to me." Dorian stood up and went into the master bedroom. Leave Sal sobbing on the couch. She finally slept, thought it was just a cruel experiment. They just wanted to test me, she said to herself. This is just a vile form of revenge. Nothing will actually happen between them. The next night, Saul stood in the bedroom looking at her husband. Pack your gym bag. No need for her to whisper. One last time. Before he left the house, she ran to the living room window and watched him get in his car and drive away. A part of her remains, believing it was just a cruel joke. When she saw him driving away, she grabbed her keys and ran to her car. Dorian had just walked into Betty's hallway when Sal pulled up. She parked her car next to the sidewalk, in front of the building, and looked up at Betty's apartment window. She sees darkness, lighting in the living room, become brighter. She saw silhouettes of human figures, flashing on the walls. About 20 minutes later, the lights in the living room were turned off, and the lights came on in Betty's bedroom. One more minute, and the whole apartment was submerged. Complete darkness. Saul thought she saw curtains in the dark bedroom moving, but she couldn't be sure. No one heard Sal's screams of pain. She came back, went home in pain. Tears down her face. At first she tried to persuade herself that this is the price she has to pay for herself. Have an affair and try to think about something else, just to kill time. That's useless. My thoughts return to my husband and my best friend. She imagined. They please each other in bed. Betty's scream of joy. She imagined husband's lovely face as he looked into Betty's face, smiled contentedly at him. At some point, her self-torture turns into pure madness. She even thought about taking one of the guns in Dorian's safe and shooting. Both are in the head, but she knows it. He had brought the key to the safe with him. He always does this. Yes, I messed up. Big time once, she said loudly, her voice choked with disgust. But not with my best friend, who also happens to be an ex-lover. She calls Dorian on his cell phone, but he didn't answer. Then she called Betty, but all calls went to voicemail. She even called Lisa, but did not receive an answer. Sal is too difficult to recognize. How late at night it was ever failed. The call was a painful blow. Another part of the plot. Resist her, completely desperate at last. She called Oscar. He came quite quickly and behaved like a true gentleman. He patiently listened to her cries of despair and explanation. Give her a glass of water. When she stabilizes comfortably on his lap, he shook gently, pat her shoulder. When she calmed down a bit, he kissed the top of her head, gently assured her that everything will be okay. When he saw that the first kiss had helped, he kissed her cheek. He is sure did not resist when she suddenly kissed him passionately. In the bedroom, they repeat all their exercises from their last night together. But this time, it's even more interesting and interesting. For Sal, it is sweet revenge with a bit of violence, and there's nothing hotter. After only the third time, both collapsed onto the paper and fell into the abyss. Sweet sleep. After a while, Saul woke up from a deep sleep because the light in the bedroom was on. Why does this idiot have to turn on the lights when he urinates? She tossed and turned in bed and felt a hand touch someone's body. If he is in bed, who turned on the light? She thought in horror. She propped herself up on her elbows and narrow. Her eyes hurt, looking at what turned out to be two images. After a few painful seconds, her sleepy eyes finally adjusted to the light. She saw Dorian and Betty stand at the foot of the bed and looked at her body that was being released beyond its limits. Betty looks angry. Dorian looked down at Sal with pity and disgust, as if he were watching a gazelle torn apart by hyenas. You owe me $500, he told Betty. Yes, I know, Betty replied coldly. You are right. I wouldn't have believed it if I don't see it with my own eyes. After listening to the above story, What feelings and thoughts did it bring to you? Please like, share, and leave your comments for us below so we can record and create better quality videos to serve everyone.